This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Shalom Aleichem, welcome everyone, Bruchim Haba to tonight's Shiur, July 4th special, in Yana D'Yoma. It was either Para Aduma or Benjamin Franklin. Those were the two choices. We have welcome back to those who are returning for the first time after all these weeks. We have a very interesting subject tonight, and that is the subject of self-improvement in Yahados, which is a very interesting topic. We know that one of the founders, the founder of the Mussar movement was Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. So Rabbi Yisroel Salantar was the Rebbe of the Altar of Kelm, the Rebbe of Rav Yitzchak Petterberg, the Rebbe of Rav Naftali Amsterdam, and most of the yeshivas in America, at least those in the Slabodka style, are offshoots of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar, because Rabbi Yisroel was the Rebbe of the Altar of Slabodka. Now, Rabbi Yisroel wrote a series of letters. Actually, we have very little in writing from Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. Most of his writing was collected by his Talmud, Rav Yitzchak Petterberg, in a sefer called Or Yisroel. Now, Or Yisroel consists of a number of parts. You have Shariar, Nesivoisar, Koichveyar, and Or Yisroel. Now, I don't think you'll hear too many people say that the Or Yisroel is their favorite sefer, but for me personally, it's one of my favorites. Koichveyar, Shariar, Nesivoisar. And Rabbi Yisroel wrote a number of letters. The letters are very difficult to read, but Rabbi Yisroel discusses the following issue. Rabbi Yisroel says, let a person not say, and I paraphrase, God created me the way He created me. I remember I was once somewhere and somebody said to me, Rabbi, you can't change people. You can only work within the way they already think. So it's a difference, right? But Rabbi Yisroel says it's not true. Let a person not say that a person might think, I can't change my nature. God created me with certain bad tendencies. He created me with certain bad Middos, and I can't uproot it. Says Rabbi Yisroel, it is not true at all. Because the abilities and the koichas of a human being are b'nei kvisha. That means you are able to conquer them. Just like we see with animals, a person, you could capture a wild animal. You could capture a whale. You could capture a walrus. You could capture a bear, and you could actually train them. If you ever go to a bear show, they could have bears doing domesticated activities. The Rambam talks about how they trained cats, right, to be waiters. So if a human being has the ability to capture and train an animal, certainly a person has the ability to, so to speak, capture the human, the nefesh habahamis. A person could capture the animal urge within him and domesticate it. In other words, if you could train a wild bear and you could train a wild lion, then why can't you train a wild person? And therefore, Rabbi Yisroel says it's a mistake to think that a person cannot change his nature. Often we think, okay, I was born arrogant, I was born angry, I'm a Baal Kas, I get angry when somebody does something against my will. The Rabbi Yisroel says it's not true. A person has the capacity to change his nature. Says Rabbi Yisroel Salantar, and if you want proof of this, look in the book, Ayin Cheshbon HaNefesh. Look in the book, Cheshbon HaNefesh. Now, what is the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh? Most people never heard of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. It's not one of the classic Mussar Sfarim. In other words, in a yeshiva that they just learn, let's say, Mesilas Yesharim, Shari Tshuva, Chavis Havavos, they ain't learning the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. But in the Mussar yeshivas, there's going to be one or two of these Sfarim sort of tucked away in the corner. What is the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh? Why is Rabbi Yisroel invoking it? Cheshbon HaNefesh, as we're going to see, is a different kind of Sefer than any of the Mussar Sfarim. If you look on the title page, it says, it's a wondrous tachbula to cure oneself from the illness of bad midos, b'derech cheshbon, and to become proficient, to be able to cure oneself and cure others, written by Rav Menachem, or Rav Mendel, Satanav of Zaborozh. Who is Rav Menachem Mendel of Satanav? He wrote the Sefer Moedel Labina and the Sefer Refuas Ha'am, And these two Svarim are going to be very telling. Amazingly, when this book was published for the very first time in 1845, this book was published with the encouragement of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. Now, if Rabbi Yisroel Salantar is encouraging the publication of the Sefer, you know this must be a very, very important Sefer. Rabbi Yisroel, after all, was the Gadol Adar and the Poisek Hadar. So that's one interesting thing. What exactly is the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh? How is it different from all our other Svarim? And what exactly is the importance of this particular Sefer? Now, the Aruch HaShulchan, who I'm sure you all heard of, Rav Baruch Epstein, Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein, had a son. His son's name was Rav Baruch Epstein. What did Rav Baruch Epstein write? He's the author of the Torah Tamima. Yeah? He's also the nephew of who? He's the nephew of the Netziv. And he wrote a very famous and controversial autobiography. He wrote an autobiography about himself. Somebody once told me, to read a biography is interesting. The most interesting thing is an autobiography. Why? Autobiographies are much more interesting than biography. Because if somebody had the need to write a book about themselves, I mean, it takes some, guts to write a book about yourself. It must be really interesting, If somebody felt that compelled to write a book about themselves, autobiographies are much better than biographies. Anyway, the Makar Baruch is a very, very interesting and controversial autobiography. If you ever want to see controversial stuff, look in the Sefer Makar Baruch. It's a few thousand pages long. It's a few volumes long. And he writes about, again, he's the son of the Aruch HaShulchan. He's very into changing girsais and answering questions by saying that there's a girsa or textual error. And he talks about the Mussar movement. And he said Rabbi Yisroel Salantar would expect from his Talmidim that the Talmidim walk around with a little notebook. And in the notebook would be a list of the various Middos. And you would have to mark yourself how you did in a certain Midah that day. In other words, there were 13 Middos, and you would have to rate yourself. How was my MS today? Did everything I say true, or was it like quasi-true or not true at all? How was my kas today? Did I blow it? Did I get annoyed? And you have to rate yourself daily. When I was in yeshiva, so we had a Rebbe that we met maybe once or twice a week, and we had to carry around a little notebook, and you had to mark yourself. How did I daven today? 3 times a day. I remember for a long time, maybe a year or two, we had to rate ourselves every day and down. And this was the technique of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. Rabbi Yisroel Salantar would test his Talmidim, how they fared in various Middos, and Rabbi Yisroel basically presented what he considered 13 Middos. The 13 primary character traits to work on. And these are known as the Yud Gimel Middos of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. Number 1, let's go through them, and we're going to see something quite interesting. The first midah of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar was MS. What is MS? Not to say a word from your mouth that you're not without full sincerity. In other words, it doesn't just mean don't lie. It means you should not be echad b'peh v'echad b'lev. Whatever you say, you need to mean it with all your being. Number 2, zrizos. Zrizos is, are those mine? I need those back. L'Binyamin Omar, I need that.
This is also marked over here by numbers. Also?
Yeah, those are my notes. Shkayach. Good. I couldn't have given to a better guy. Shkayach. So, so the second one is zrizos. Zrizos is don't waste even a moment. Do what you got to do. That's zrizos. In other words, don't let time idle away, but capitalize on every moment you have. Number 3, charitzos. What's charitzos? Charitzos is the moment you decide that you should do something, immediately do it. Go do it immediately with shkeda, with diligence, uveregesh, and with feeling. I like to say, in America, we do everything half-hearted. But when you need to do something, do it with every fiber of your being. We're very used to Shemona Esrei. So how do we bow by Shemona Esrei? Let's do that, You're not yotze bowing. The Shulchan Aruch says you have to bow. Ad sheyifakaku kol chol yosheh b'shidra. You need to bend your knees like this, not You bend your knees like this. You have to bow until every vertebrae in your back is protruding. The Gemara says if someone doesn't do that, after 120, your back turns into a snake. Now you're in the shul anyway, you might as well do it right. So why don't we do it right? Because we're American. Americans do things half-heartedly. How do you do Oisa Shalom? No, not you. Nobody. I wasn't watching you. In other words, by the Hasidim they say like this. In Europe, in America when it snows, it doesn't even snow anymore in the winter. And when it snows 4 inches, 5 inches. That's because in America nobody does everything with a full bren. In Europe when it snows 3 feet deep. When it rains, it's mamet segista mabul. You know, when it's hot, it's 150 degrees. In America, everything's homogenized, So Rabbi Yisroel would say the midah is do whatever you set out to do with diligence and with feeling. Kavod. Kavod is be careful to honor every person, even someone who you don't agree with. Menucha.
Is that emes?
What?
Is that emes?
You mean it's a stira to emes?
Yes.
It doesn't mean you could tell him, by the way, what you did to me, I hate you. But you honor him, you respect him. In other words, you don't insult him, but you tell him the truth. That's what it says by the Achei Yosef. V'lo yachlu l'dabrei l'shalom. That was l'shvachei, Rashi says. Okay. The Rabbi Yisroel continues. Menucha. What's menuchas HaNefesh? To have peace of mind. Doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You could be in utter turmoil. You could be, your world is swirling. You don't know what's going to be. But you have to have a certain tranquility, a certain calm, and do everything with menucha. Nachas, what's nachas? Nachas is to speak calmly. The words of the wise, they're heard when they're spoken calmly. And that's how one should speak. Cleanliness. Cleanliness is to be clean, pure in your body and in your clothing. I remember we had a Rebbe in 8th grade. He got his shirt a little dirty and he had to go home. Now he could have gotten away. He could have, put the jacket on top, but it's a midah of nikias. That when a person is dirty, then nothing they do is as proper. It affects your whole being. Then you have savlanos. Savlanos is to tolerate. To tolerate b'menucha, every circumstance, every difficulty in life. Seder, order. Do all your actions in an order. Uvemishtar, with a regimen. Don't be haphazard. This came up, so I'll do that. Oh, that came up, so I'll do this. Have a schedule. Have an order in the way that you do things. Anova, what is humility? Says Rabbi Yisroel. Recognize your own deficiencies and divert your attention from the deficiencies of others. That's a midah of anivos. Tzedek, righteousness is be mevater from your own. Kimutz, stinginess. And everything, I know a lot of people like that. Stinginess is don't spend a penny that you don't need to spend. Shtika. Think about the purpose of your words before you say them. If what you're about to say does not have a purpose, then scratch it. And Rabbi Yisroel would constantly try to beautify and shine these 13 middos, and he would expect this from his Talmidim. He would ask his Talmidim, how is this midah today? How is that midah today? And this was Rabbi Yisrael's approach. And Rabbi Yisroel would say, how do you know if somebody has a good nefesh? A midah toiva clings to a nefesh toiva. So if you see somebody that has midah toivos, that's a siman on their midah. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? What this has to do is, there's a kuntris called Boyu Cheshbon. The kuntris Boyu Cheshbon, I'll tell you the truth, I looked everywhere. I didn't want to bother anyone yesterday, so I called every store. Do you have the kuntris Boyu Cheshbon? Nobody had it, nobody heard of it, they did research. You could get it in Israel, you could get it here. Nah, so I need it today. And I even checked Oitzar HaChachma. But then Yossi Wacholder to me, you have extras on you. Okay, that's good to know. On you right now, currently, presently?
Yeah.
Right now, where are you? Come over.
In Flatbush, maybe tomorrow.
Come over. Well, Uber. It doesn't take long. Okay. You have the Kunchas Bayu Cheshbon on the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh?
Yeah, I believe it's just like a calendar. You mark off different things. It's really good.
No, you'll see. Kunchas Bayu Cheshbon is basically the history of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. Maybe that's what it has in the back, I'm not sure. And there was a lot of controversy that began to swirl about the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. What was so controversial about it? Well, first of all, this was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Yerucham Bordiansky, the Menahel of Yeshiva Kol Torah. And in the last Zman, meaning in recent history, there have been a lot of challenges against the Sefer and against the author of the Sefer. And the main accusation is that the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, which by the way is available from Feldheim, it's translated, is just a Hebrew translation from one of the Gentile scholars, but then his first name is Binyamin, and his second name is Franklin. That this great Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh is just a Hebrew translation of one of Benjamin Franklin's ethical works. So this big Mussar Sefer that in Slobodka and in my yeshiva they're very into, it's like a George Washington ethical book. It was a translation from Benjamin Franklin. And they translated it into Hebrew, just like many scholars have translated Aristotle, Socrates. And look, there's nothing wrong. Chazal tell us, Chachma b'umais tamin. And one of the contemporary writers writes, what's the problem? Imagine if a Gentile comes into a dark room with a flashlight. You're going to say, oh, Ivai, turn off the flashlight. It's not a Yiddish light. If the light works, use the light. What's the nafkamino? Whose light it is? So somebody writes a book, and it can help you improve your character. If yesterday you were an angry, arrogant, bad dude, and now by reading this book you're going to have better Middos, so go for it. What's wrong? There's no problem. If a guy is madlik aner mishtamish la'oiroi, so the Chachmei Hadar gave a haskama to the book, and they said it's good. So Klal Yisrael said, Mekudash, Mekudash. That's the challenge. That this book comes from none other than Benjamin Franklin. Now, by the way, Benjamin Franklin was no Jew. Benjamin Franklin was born in 1706, and he passed away in 1790. He's one of the founding fathers, and the reason I spoke about it is I wanted to talk about something regarding American history, and L'Kavod, Chagam, and what, you have a Chiddush, Azriel?
This is the $100 bill.
Benjamin Franklin's on the $100 bill. You have one on you. Shkayach.
Yisroel Salantar didn't know this?
We're going to get to it. That's what the Shiur is about. Now, Franklin was a leading writer, printer, political philosopher, politician, Freemason. You know what Freemasons are?
Yeah.
On every dollar, Freemason was a ethical society. He was a postmaster, scientist, inventor, ambassador of the United States to France. He spent a lot of time in London. He was one of the most influential Americans in the history of this country, and he signed and crafted the Declaration of Independence. And he was a great inventor. He was a great ethicist. He was a mammon. He was not a major churchgoer. He did not invoke the Yozel. And he wrote a book of ethics. And he's the one who invented, as we're about to see, the 13 Middos. He invented it. Not only did he invent it,
You just said?
we're going to get to that. Not only did he invent it, he invented the method to work on Middos presented by the Cheshbon HaNefesh with the Haskama of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. This is the accusation, and the question is it true? And if it's true, is it a problem? Is there anything wrong? In other words, if in fact the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh is based on Benjamin Franklin, does that detract from the Sefer? Do we say, okay, maybe we're not going to throw it in the garbage, but at the end of the day, we have enough Jewish books. What's wrong with Mesilas Yesharim, Shari Tshuva, Chovos HaLevavos, and all the other classics? Why do we need to go to a Hebrew translation of Benjamin Franklin's great work? Now,
You can kiss it after you learn it.
that's a nafkamina, whether you kiss it or not. So, okay, that's one nafkamina. Or if somebody makes a neder and he says, I'm marrying a woman, al manas, that Benjamin Franklin wrote the book. So if he wrote the book, it's a good kedushin. If he didn't write the book, it's not a good kedushin. That's another nafkamina. But, so, okay. So that's the question. And a whole kuntris was written on this subject. Who is responsible for the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh? Was it a plagiarized version of Benjamin Franklin's work? And if so, does that detract from the Sefer?
What year did Yisroel Salantar live?
Rabbi Yisroel Salantar lived also in the 18th century, in the 18th century, more to the end of the 18th century. He lived after Benjamin Franklin. Absolutely. Benjamin Franklin was a mid-range achroin, lahavdil, and Rabbi Yisroel Salantar was later. So that's the question. This is a famous controversy in the Mussar world. Is it true that the Yud Gimel Middos, my parents had in their house a lithograph from Yonah Weinreb of the Yud Gimel Middos of Yisroel Salantar. But then, my parents upgraded their art, and I got the lithograph, and of course, it's still sitting in my office on the side of my file cabinet. But there's a thing, the Yud Gimel Middos Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. Many yeshivas, they have in the classroom. Yud Gimel Middos Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. The only thing is, this seems not to have been invented by Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. This seems to have been the invention of Benjamin Franklin. So we go to the official record of the Mussar movement. Anybody know? The official recorder and biographer of the Mussar movement was Rav Dov Katz. Rav Dov Katz was a Talmud of Slobodka, a historian, and he recorded all the biographical information on Rabbi Yisroel Salantar, Rabbi Itzel Petterberger, Rabbi Naftali Amsterdam, the Alter of Kelm, Rabbi Simcha Zissel, all the great Balei Mussar, he recorded their biographies. He's the Talmud of the Alter. He wrote a book which is out of print, you can't get it. Rabbi Gedalia, I'm not even going to ask you, this is probably the most difficult sefer to find. This is not even a tease, you can't get it. This is mamish like Becherem She'en Kamayu. It's called Pulmus HaMussar, the war against Mussar. Some Rosh Hashivas held it's not the correct approach. And obviously, Rabbi Yisroel, Rabbi Itzel Petterberg, they did promulgate Mussar, and ultimately it was fully accepted. Anyway, the bottom line is, Beagleizen has it?
Yeah, what is he?
Pulmus HaMussar?
Doesn't even know what Beagleizen is.
Okay.
That's an iron.
Okay, in the Sefer Tenuas HaMussar, he brings that Rabbi Yisrael's big creation. In other words, before Rabbi Yisrael, there was something called Mesilas Yesharim, there was something called Sharei Tshuva, there was something called Chavas HaVavos. But Rabbi Yisrael's innovation was that you could work on Middos by training yourself. Which means not just sitting in front of a Sefer and mastering the Chachma that's in the Sefer, but rather Rabbi Yisroel would give his Talmidim exercises. Okay, you're working on Anivus, so today you're gonna take off your rabbinic garb. Today you're gonna go and do things that are humbling. And tomorrow you're gonna do it again. And the next day you're gonna do it again. You would do exercises. This was all part of Rabbi Yisrael's regimen. And Rabbi Yisrael promulgated the Yud Gimel Middos that we quoted. So very interesting, Rav Dov Katz writes that a Chacham Echad listed these 13 Middos. Now, who's the Chacham Echad? Rav Dov Katz says in a footnote, this Chacham Echad was the Torah Tmima, Rav Baruch Epstein. And he then writes in a footnote the following. He doesn't agree with everything the Torah Tmima says. Regarding that which the Torah Tmima says, that Rabbi Yisrael said that these 13 Middos include all Middos, it's incorrect. Rabbi Yisrael was just giving suggestions of main Middos to work on, but of course if somebody feels there are other Middos they need to work on, by all means, you should put a part of your regimen. Why did Rabbi Yisrael pick 13 Middos? Why did the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh pick 13? Because this was the big discovery of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, which ultimately Benjamin Franklin, he was the one who invented it, that if you want to work on a midah, don't work on it for a month straight or a year straight. You pick one midah, you work on it for a week, and you drop it. And then the next midah, you work on it for a week, and you drop it. And the third midah, you work on it, and you drop it for the course of 13 weeks. Then you start over again, and you do it again. This way, each midah you end up working on 4 weeks out of the year, and if you drop it and come back to it, psychologically it reinforces what you learn. If every day you're going to work on the same midah, it becomes rote, it becomes tiring, it becomes boring. So you switch it up. You have a whole cyclical system. And, says Rav Dov Katz, if you want to know, where does the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh come from? Of course, It's a takeoff on Benjamin Franklin. So if anybody had any doubts that there's any connection between the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh and Benjamin Franklin, Reb Dov Katz says obviously one is a takeoff on the other. But as we're going to see, there are very basic and important distinctions. And we're going to talk about the importance of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, the unique quality of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, how it's different from all other Mussar Sfarim, and ultimately how it differs from what Benjamin Franklin had in mind. So the first thing that's brought in the Sefer Kuntras Boyu Cheshbon is this author, Rav Mendel of Satanov, translated other works as well. If he, in fact, translated Franklin, he translated a lot of secular works. For example, the Sefer Refuos Ha'am, which is a translation of the philosopher T.S. He acknowledges, I translated his work into Yiddish. He also translated into Yiddish Koheles and Mishlei. So that was his specialty. He was a translator. He was able to present one language in a different language. But now the question is, who was this person? Is he reliable? Is this a reliable sefer? Is it considered a holy work? So says the Kuntras Boyu Cheshbon that our emunah is based on the fact that we have emunas chachamim. What's emunas chachamim? Emunas chachamim is, if the chacham says what I say, then I trust what he says, right? Of course, that's what emunas chachamim is. That if I agree with the chacham, then I have emunas chachamim. No, that's not what emunas chachamim is. Emunas chachamim is, when I don't agree with the chacham, I know, that doesn't mean he's 100% right, but it's more likely that he's more correct than me, because he's more connected to the Torah than I am. That's emunas chachamim. That's pashut emunas chachamim. So what do the chachamim say about the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh? So they say as follows, that in 1845, Rabbi Yisroel, the Gadol Hadar, vouched for the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. In 1894, there was a great guy, Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzin. Who's Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzin? You ever hear of the Siddur Hagra? Siddur Hagra is the classic Siddur Hagra. It has a pirush on it called Siach Yitzchak. It was also, the Rav Meltzin published the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. In 1937, the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh was republished. By who? By the Talmidim of the Slabodka Yeshiva. Not only that, the Rosh Yeshiva of Slabodka. Who is the Rosh Yeshiva of Slabodka? Rav Isaac Sher. You ever hear of Rav Isaac Sher? Rav Isaac was the Rosh Yeshiva of Slabodka in Slabodka. He was the son-in-law of the Alter of Slabodka. The Alter of Slabodka moved to Hebron. He left Slabodka with his son-in-law, Rav Isaac Sher. I used to have the schus to go to Rav Victor Miller. Rav Victor Miller was a Talmud Muvak of Rav Isaac Sher. So he published the Cheshbon HaNefesh, and if you buy an edition of Cheshbon HaNefesh today, it comes with a foreword from Rav Isaac Sher. Rav Zundel of Salant. Who's Rav Zundel of Salant? He's the Rebbe of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. He was fond of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh that he even rewrote it in his own handwriting. Not only that, 12 Gedolei Hadar gave a haskama to the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. Who were they? Look on the top left-hand side of your page. Rabbi Yaakov Ornstein. Who's Rabbi Yaakov Ornstein? Is the Yeshuas Yaakov. Rabbi Elazar Segal Landau, son of the Noidei Yehuda. We're dealing with all-time great Gedolim, gave a haskama to the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. So the author of this Kuntras says that he asked a Gadol by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Gershon Weiss, please do some research. Who exactly is this Rabbi Menachem Mendel Misatanov? Why did he translate a philosophical work on medicine by one of the secular doctors? Is he in fact what some people said? Was he a maskil? Now you have to know that sometimes somebody will have the title maskil, but it doesn't mean he's one of the maskilim. He could just be what is called an academic. You know what the difference is between a Talmud Chacham and an academic? Talmud Chacham studies Torah in depth. An academic will sometimes study other disciplines, whatever it may be, science, mathematics, medicine, and maybe sometimes connected to Chachmas HaTorah. So the question is, who is this Rabbi Menachem Mendel Misatanov? So this is what was discovered. What was discovered was that this Goin, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Satanov, was an Eloi Meforsam. He was a great Charif. And not only was he a great Talmid Chacham, he happened to have a brilliant mind to study many, many disciplines. And he mastered many secular disciplines. And because of that, he had the capacity, so to speak, to be looked up to in the observant and the frum world as somewhat of academic. In other words, he had the capacity to gain the respect of the greater Jewish world beyond just the, let's say, the Olam HaCharedi, because he was an intellectual. Okay, be it as it may, here's the story, here's the scoop. He was such a masmid that he had terrible eye ailments. So what did he have to do? He had to go to Berlin. Watch out for Berlin, because back in the day, Berlin was the seat of the Haskalah. And who does he meet in Berlin? Moses Mendelssohn. And Moses Mendelssohn sees in him a kindred spirit. He sees, an intellectual that's somebody who he could handle with. And he tried to influence him, but even Moses Mendelssohn agreed. His neshama, his kedusha was so strong that he was not able to sort of make headway with him. But this is where perhaps the mistake arose, that this Reb Menachem Mendel Misatanov bordered on what we'll call academia, but in fact, it was discovered that he was a great tzaddik, a great goin, a great Talmid Chacham, and while he did translate a secular work of medicine, and he did translate Mishlei and Koheles into Yiddish, the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh he wrote with great kedusha. Now, what about the fact that it seems to be based on Benjamin Franklin?
These 13 items are in order, and it's the same order?
So we're going to examine that very soon. Okay, we're going to examine what exactly were Franklin's 13 Middos, and how does that match up to what he did. Now, in the Kunshas Boyu Cheshbon, they bring a very compelling and powerful hashkafa of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar, which is not so well known in, let's say, the yeshiva world. In Lita, in Lithuania, they have a different take on Avodas Hashem than anyone else. They have an expression which sums it all up. You ready for this expression? They would say like this: Frum is a galach. You ever hear that expression? Frum. Oh, he's frum. Galachim are frum. Somebody once told, in Lita they say like this: not frum un klig, klig un frum. Not frum and then be smart. The first thing is you have to be smart. You have to know how to think clearly. You have to know how to think straight. If you can't think straight, then the frumkeit is verkrumt. There's nothing worse than frumkeit. So you need to be kligen frum, not frum and klig. Frum is a galach. That's the mahalach and lita. So Rabbi Yisroel would say the following: that if somebody just knows Yiras Shamayim, let's say someone's a very big Yiras Shamayim. Oh, he's a big Yiras Shamayim, so he's going to jump up in the morning and run to shul and daven with his slavos and learn with a bren, and he's going to do everything correct. Rabbi Yisroel says no, he's not. It's not enough to be a Yiras Shamayim, Rabbi Yisroel would say. Together with Yiras Shamayim, you have to know Mili de Alma. Now, what is Mili de Alma? This is not, you have to know secular disciplines. It's not you have to know mathematics. It's not you have to know science. No, that's not the Shita of the Bali Mussar. The Shita of the Bali Mussar is, you have to know Mili de Alma. Mili de Alma is self-awareness. If you don't know how a human being operates, if you don't know the internal mechanics of the human persona, if you don't understand why people react certain ways to certain methods, or if you don't understand why you react certain ways to certain things, then you can have all the Yiras Shamayim in the world. It's still not going to help you meet your end goal. So Rabbi Yisroel would say you need to combine Yiras Shamayim with Mili de Alma. This was the big shita of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. And Rabbi Yisroel really praised the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, because the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, as we're going to see, is the most unique of all the Mussar Sfarim. All the Mussar Sfarim, you see, a person is composed of two elements. And by the way, this, what I'm about to say, actually comes from the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. The Cheshbon HaNefesh says, you have to look at yourself. Imagine there's an old man. I know you guys don't know what old is. Old is like, people who are 170. You know the joke about the guy who came into the life insurance office? Let's see who's listening to this share. Eli Sisma, you know this joke? You probably know this joke. Steven, you ready for a good joke? Okay. I guess I'll take that. You ready? Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay. So joke's like this. In the early days of the state of Israel, a guy comes in. Do you know there was a movement, Operation Magic Carpet. So the Israeli government, took in the Teimanim, right? And they shipped in they flew overnight, thousands of Teimanim to Israel. And of course the Teimanim have no record of how old they were. So they had extraordinary claims of how old they were. So a Teimani Jew comes into a life insurance office and he says, I would like to buy a policy. So the lady says, really? She looks at him, the guy looks like he's, ancient history. How old are you? He says, I'm 82. She says, you're 82 and you wanna buy a policy? They can't sell you a policy, you're too old. He said, what? My father came in last week and you sold him a policy. Your father? So you sold him. How old's your father? Father's 105. Father's 105, we burned the Alma Kuma. How do we sell him a policy? Impossible. She checks the records. Sure enough, they sold the father a policy last week. So he says, look, if we sold your father a policy, we're going to sell you a policy. Come in next Tuesday. Yeah, next Tuesday? I can't come next Tuesday. I have a wedding. She says, I hope you don't mind that. Whose wedding? My grandfather. Your grandfather? How old is your grandfather? She's 127. He's 127, he's getting married? He said, it's not him. His parents are forcing him into it. So that's, people used to live very old ages. That's old. So, Rabbi Yisroel, the Cheshbon HaNefesh says that if you want to know what is a human being, you have an old guy. He could barely move his limbs. And he's riding on a donkey. Now, the old man and the donkey, they don't want the same thing in life. The old man needs to get to a destination. The donkey wants to sit here and do absolutely nothing. So what's the old man going to do? If he's smart, he knows he has to feed the donkey. If you give the donkey what you want, the donkey will take you where you want to go. So a person has to know they're consisted of a seichel, which is like an old man, and a donkey, which is the nefesh habahamis. We want to eat, we want to sleep, we want pleasure. So the chachma of life is, how are you going to get to Olam Haba? Because look, the only way you get there is with this donkey, your body. But you're not a donkey. Your donkey is not going up to Shamayim. It's the old man. It's the seichel. So the seichel got to figure out, how am I going to get this behema in me to go and do what I want to do? So Rabbi Yisroel would say like this. Every other Mussar sefer talks to the seichel, the intellect. The Mesillas Yesharim, the Shari Tshuva, the Archas Tzadikim, the Chavos talks to the seichel. The only sefer that helps you overcome and understand the nefesh habahamis is the sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. So now, I want to just show you in the sefer Kunshas Bayu Cheshbon, he brings a analysis of Benjamin Franklin's Yud Gimel Middos as opposed to Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. So here it goes. Here are the 13 principles of Benjamin Franklin. And they go like this. Number 1, histapkos. Don't eat stam. Oh, it's 11:30. What do I do now? Shachris was 2 hours ago. I don't know. I'll eat something. Why are you eating? You're not really hungry. We let our kids fool us. Daddy, Tati, I'm starving. You're not starving. You ate supper 2 hours. How are you starving? But in America, you eat as a thing. It's like a thing to do. You don't have anything I have nothing to eat now. I don't have a computer now. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to eat. So Benjamin Franklin said, do not eat unless you need to. Do not drink unless you need to. That's the first midah. Number 2, speaking. Don't speak unless there's a benefit in your words. If what you're about to say has no benefit, don't say it. Number 3, order. Every item should have a place. Every subject should have a time. Necheratzos, which is diligence. From the moment you decide to do something, do it with full heart. Chaschonos is a stinginess. Don't spend money for no reason. You should give a cheshbon for the money that you should have a cheshbon for the money that you spend. Oh, I saw this looks really nice, I'm going to buy it. So Benjamin Franklin's value is, don't buy it if you don't need to spend the money. Okay? What was it saying? A penny saved is a penny earned. Kanos, honesty. Don't be deceitful. Don't be disingenuous. Whatever you say, you should mean wholeheartedly. Tzedek, righteousness. Don't do anything, don't commit any iniquity. Don't hurt somebody. Don't refrain from helping somebody. Messinos is balance. Try to avoid extremes. Okay, these are all the values, so to speak, lahavdil of Benjamin Franklin. Cleanliness, tranquility, and by the way, derech eretz. Now, what does derech eretz refer to? So in Hebrew it says, derech eretz refers to something that should not be in a Jewish book. That means this was Benjamin Franklin's code of marital interaction. Okay? By the way, just off the record, even though Benjamin Franklin was probably the greatest American ethicist, he was no saint. Because later in life, he acknowledged a illegitimate son, as many of the founding fathers did. Okay? So this is already the first hefresh and hevdel between ethics that come from a person's seichel and ethics that are misinai with Yer Shamayim. Because here it is, the greatest ethicist failed, and by his own admission.
He wrote in his book, the Sefer Yehudi?
No, this is in the Kuntras, by Cheshbon said he didn't want to write in a Jewish book what Franklin was referring to. And then finally, Anvisanusai is humility. Yeah? Now, Rabbi Yisroel Salantar, we already said what his 13 Middos are. Peace of mind, patience, order, diligence, cleanliness, humility, righteousness, careful in spending money, energetic action, shtika, speaking benachas, emes. Okay, now are the Middos very close? Very close. Did one come from the other? Rav Dov Katz, look, I wasn't there, it's before my time. Rav Dov Katz said, yes, there's no question. There's no question that the Middos of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar are an offshoot of Benjamin Franklin. Now, Marv Rabboisai, here's the Nakuda. What is the reality about Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh? And the reality is that there is such a fundamental difference between the Middos of Benjamin Franklin and the Middos of the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh and Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. And this is really the Nakuda of the Tosfos Yom Tif, the first the Bar Tanura, the first Bar Tanura and Pirkei Avos. We all know Pirkei Avos begins, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, which is a Pella. You know, isn't that random? We should begin Pirkei Avos, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. You could begin any Masechta in Shas, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Baba Kama is Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Baba Metzia is Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. You know, Ksubis is Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Why say Dafka by Pirkei Avos, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai? The answer is, says the Bar Tanura, because Avada and Avada. Baba Kama is Misinai, Baba Metzia is Misinai, and all the Ksubas is Misinai. But I mistakenly would have said that when Beis Shammai says that when you see someone you should smile, that why should you smile? Because al pi seichel, when you see someone you should give them a smile. No, that's not the reason. We don't have courtesy and etiquette the way the founding fathers did. We don't believe in that. We have courtesy and ethics. Because God told Moshe Rabbeinu, by the way, tefillin need to be black, and there's something called a paraduma, and there's certain type of behavior which is expected and required as Torah Misinai. And this is the difference between, yes, did Benjamin Franklin invent a concept of Yud Gimel Middos? In all likelihood, at least according to Rav Dov Katz, he for sure did. Is the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh based on it? It seems it's based on it. However, why didn't the Cheshbon HaNefesh give him credit? The answer is, because he did. Because if anybody ever opens a Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, if you look in Parak Chaf, he writes, I want everyone to know that there's a Chacham in America who invented an invention that, in his opinion, an invention like this has never been discovered since the printing press. And he hopes that this invention spreads throughout the world. And you know what the invention is? The invention is that the best way to work on Middos is not just say, okay, I'm going to work on MS for a year, or Anivas for a year, or Kina for a year. It's you take a Midah, you work on it for a week, and then you move on to another Midah, and you move on to another Midah. And basically, the Cheshbon HaNefesh is giving credit to Benjamin Franklin for this discovery. I mean, would there be any problem if the Sefer wrote, there's a guy in America, he came up with a great invention. It's called light bulbs. And therefore, I want everybody during the nighttime to learn Torah because Thomas Edison discovered a light bulb. Would there be any chisaron in that kind of Mussar? Of course not. Is there a problem because a Jew did not invent a camera, that you can't use the camera? Of course not, if it helps people learn. So you use it, as long as you give credit to where credit to what?
Jews sell the camera.
Jews sell the camera. It happens to be true.
Was Franklin a takeoff of our Shloshas and Middos?
Maybe Franklin, got the idea of Yud Gimel Middos
13.
of HaKadosh Baruch. I don't know. It's not really important. It's not really that. It doesn't really make a difference. The bottom line is, though, if you read the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, the manner of analysis with which the Cheshbon HaNefesh treats each midah is on a completely different plane than the ethics of Benjamin Franklin. Because the goal of Benjamin Franklin was to be, like Dale Carnegie would say, to win friends and influence people. It was merely to get ahead in this world. It was merely to be respected in this world. It was a shaloi lishma. It was not for the divine aspect of the human being. But if you study the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, for example, he talks about the importance of menuchas HaNefesh. You know how the Cheshbon HaNefesh describes the importance of peace of mind? Says the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, a person is guided by his seichel. The seichel is at the top of the human. It's the guiding light of a human being. And when a person has peace of mind and clarity of thought, then he's able to govern all of his activities by the dictates of the seichel. But the moment someone is off kilter, the moment somebody is overwhelmed, the moment somebody is thrown off, and now he's acting impulsively, so now a person will not be able to exercise free choice. How could someone exercise free choice when his seichel is clouded and is in turmoil and is off kilter? And therefore, this is a very different approach to self-improvement than the approach of, American ethics. American ethics is, let's have a civil society. Let's get along for the betterment of mankind. But the ethics of the Torah is a completely different system. The ethics of the Torah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew into the human being a divine soul. And the divine soul is created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And by adopting certain character traits and working on certain midos, you become more and more and more like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you're elevating the neshama to be that which it was created to be. So the bottom line is, the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh was extolled greatly by Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. The Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh is a very in-depth analysis of how to deal with the Nefesh HaBahamis. Is it based on 13 traits of Franklin? Many say, including Rav Dov Katz, yes. Is that an issue? It's not an issue b'chlal. The same way if you come in with a flashlight, if a akum is holding a flashlight, then you walk by the light. So if these are valid, salient points, which have been endorsed by Gedolei Yisrael, like the Yeshuas Yaakov, like Rabbi Yisrael Salantar, then we know that this is kosher v'yashar. And by the way, Rabbi Yisroel Salantar never said that these Yud Gimel Middos are Mamish Torah Misinai, and there are no other Middos. Rabbi Yisroel is maskim, whatever Middos you feel you need to work on, you should work on. You could open up the Archas Tzadikim, take out the list of 25 Middos, and they should all be worked on. But this is just some of the background, and interesting how somebody living on the other end of the world, his discovery was actually adopted by Gedolei Yisrael to some extent, and this is something we still use till today. But as Chazal tell us, Chachma b'Goyim tamen. If somebody tells you the Goyim have wisdom, you believe them. But if somebody says Torah b'Goyim, that the Goyim have divine wisdom, they don't have divine wisdom. Sometimes they have Seichel HaYashar. For the most part, Seichel HaYashar is often distorted by the Chemda and Taiva. But Mar Rabbi Sai, there's a concept, you take Chachma from where you could get it, and ultimately the Balei Mussar did adopt some of these practices. And as the Gra says, if somebody is not constantly working on their Middos, Lama Li Chayim, that's the tachlis of living, for someone to purify their Middos, we should be Zoich Le'Bar Hashem to give us Siyata D'Shmaya, to be Masakin, Kol Midosenu, Shkayach everyone, Agute Nacht. Paraduma? Yeah. Yes. Yaakov, how you doing? Yes or no? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Torah.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.